how do you film by yourself? No camera operator, no sound guy, no grip, only you, and you're supposed to film something? Well, today I'm going to tell you how to do that. Hello, I'm Leif from Anything Cameras, the channel that focuses on helping you improve your filming and photography. And as I said in the hook, today is going to be all about filming solo. Now, it can be daunting at first to not have a camera operator at least, and it is nice to have an audio guy and somebody for lighting. But as a new filmer, we don't have those luxuries. So here is how to do it by yourself. I would suggest going with a camera that has a tally light on it. The X-T3 I own has a tally light. Another convenient feature is a flip out screen, a fully articulating one. Flip up and down are okay, but as I said in one of my videos, I don't really like them. Now, if you do not have a camera that has a flip out screen, you can put a dummy where you're gonna stand or sit. Like, I've used lights, I've used, just putting a light stand, or grab somebody off the street and say, if you're filming outside, and say, hey, can you just sit on this bench while I frame up my shot? I've done that one before too. Now, if you don't want to do that and you got a little extra coin, you can always go with an external monitor that you can mount to the hot shoe on top of your camera. This is very convenient because they're bigger than the built-in screens on your camera and allow you to get a great view of what your camera's seeing. Now, let's talk about setting up audio. Audio can be hard, and as you see, in some of my shots, I don't even try to hide the mic. In the past video I filmed, it was plain for everybody to see. I held the microphone. It was just a small video mic from Rode. So, not pretty, but doesn't really matter. If it just depends on what type of video you're filming. Now, if you want to hide it, I would suggest getting a microphone stand, which we do here. We have a microphone stand holding the mic we use in the studio. And that's very nice, but if you want to get a wide shot like you see here, and you don't want the microphone or the cord in it, you got to get a lavalier mic, a wireless lavalier microphone system. Now, these can get a little pricey, but if you go with the Rode Wireless Go setup, it's only $200 for a really high quality lavalier microphone, which is good. So that's a great product for beginners. Let's just talk about setting up gear. And I know that can be quite difficult when you are by yourself and you got all sorts of stuff to set up. It can take a while and just be super inconvenient. So a quick suggestion. Keep your camera mounted on your tripod from scene to scene. Just leave it on there. Also, bring an extra bag when you're shooting by yourself so you can put loose items that are out of your camera bag that you don't feel like putting back in right into this tote bag of loose items that you use all the time. That just speeds up the process and makes it more convenient. Before we go on to the next couple of tips, I'd just like to ask you to subscribe for more great content like this, more tips and tricks on how to improve your filming and photography. So now we're past setting up. Let's talk about making sure your exposure and your white balance and all your other camera settings are correct. Before you start shooting, take a look at your camera screen. Take a good long look at that exposure. Also, histograms on the screen for exposure are very handy. If you, as I said, if you can, get somebody to stand in as a subject just to set your exposure and white balance. And now, once you know how to set your exposure and white balance, let's move on to the other settings. There's a lot more to video than just exposure and framing. There's resolution, frame rate, bit rate, whether you're going to be shooting in log or not. And sometimes if you screw up a couple of these settings, it can just not work out quite right in the editor. So I would suggest making a checklist and looking at that checklist every time you go to shoot. So do I have it in the right resolution? Check that. Right frame rate? Check. Right bit rate? Check. Is it log or another format of filming? Check. Once you go through a whole checklist, then you can start your filming. We have a couple of videos explaining all these settings that I've been talking about, like color profile, white balance, and exposure. Also, we have a video on bitrate, frame rate, and resolution. Those videos have a lot of good information for you if you are new to this, if you're new to filming and you need to know what to do. Now, I want to touch on exposure once more. This is a very important part of filming by yourself. Make sure that your frame rate and your aperture are correct. Generally, you want to film with a wide aperture. Not always is that possible, but generally the widest aperture you can get. And that frame rate has to be perfect. Otherwise, it's not going to look as good. So on your checklist that you made, make sure to put check aperture, check frame rate. Because once those are correct, then your video is just going to look that much better. So I want to also talk about how to get some good framing by yourself. You know, I said get somebody off the street or use a dummy, something like that. But there's also just how to frame a still shot. That can be kind of difficult sometimes. As you see here, where I'm sitting on this bench, there are two trees next to me, kind of making an arch over the scene, and I'm sitting on this bench, but the bench was not centered. So I threw my bike on one side and my camera bag on the other side of the bench and sat center of frame. So it kind of balanced it out a little bit more. Another technique to finding those good framing is actually looking up basic photography composition. You might think, why photography? Well, because it's still shots basically. If the subject isn't moving and the camera isn't moving, then it's basically like photography, just with audio. So look up a video on how to do basic photography composition. We will have one coming out very soon if you want to check that out. Make sure you know what you're gonna say before you go onto camera, because it's just a pain in the butt to have to walk up to the camera, stop, start, delete. It just makes everything a lot slower, and maybe you want to do a one take, but sometimes you run down your camera's half-hour time limit and it stops recording in the middle of your sentence, which is really annoying. Now, if you're one of those lucky people who does not have a recording time limit on their camera, then good for you, but I'm not one of them, so just keep that in mind. Rehearse what you're going to say, then go in front of camera and say it. So, 2 ways to memorize easily. Number 1, write a full script. That is pretty easy to learn from, and you won't make any mistakes as long as you rehearse it enough. Number 2 is what I do. I write down some points, basic ideas of what I'm going to talk about in order that I'm going to talk about them. And that way, I know what I'm supposed to be talking about and when. And I'm usually pretty good at improv. In fact, I'm improvising this whole video, so, I don't really need to have a full script. Okay, so now you know how to frame, you know how to memorize lines and make sure you're saying the right stuff, and you know how to properly compose your shots with exposure and your resolution, and you know how to remember how to do everything with a handy little checklist that's super easy to remember. Now there's one little bonus tip I'm going to give you. Get a wider lens whether you're vlogging or not if you're filming yourself. Just way easier. I have a 10-24 on my camera. Makes my life so much easier. Thanks for watching, and check out some of our other videos. Wait, why do we need to sync? Oh, yeah, that camera. Hello.